Okay, we're live. I can see people starting to come to the webinar. Thank you so much to Elizabeth and to Jim and to Sophie for putting together this session on the impact of the Biden administration on mobility. Periods of great uncertainty are always followed by great experts being able to guide us through the clarity that we kind of all need, I think. So Sophie, I'm going to hand over to you. I'm going to give you the host make host, there we go. There's still quite a few people to come in. Like I said, there's 120 people signed up, and at the moment 27 people in the room, so up to you. And I will hopefully make myself disappear, and I'll come back to you at the end. But if you need anything, just shout. I'll be sitting right here.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Tom. Firstly, yeah, I am in no way an expert on US immigration. So we have the brilliant Jim and the brilliant Liz. And while people are coming in, I might actually, do you guys want to introduce yourself, or shall I do my musical interlude already? Maybe I should I do my musical introduction?
I think so.
I think I should. So we have a small musical introduction. So hopefully I'm going to be able to actually perform the miracle of screen share. So let's have a look. So I wanted to play you guys this.
As your body grows bigger,
your mind lost power.
It's great to learn,
'Cause knowledge is power. It's Schoolhouse Rocking, the chip off the block of your favorite schoolhouse, Schoolhouse Rock.
I'm just a bill.
There we go. There we go. So I hope that was a pleasant experience for you all, and we will explain what that was all about in just a moment. So now let's do some introductions first. I'm so bad at remembering to introduce people. So Jim, I think a lot of people know you already, but why don't you give us a little intro?
Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everyone. My name is Jim Alexander, and I'm a managing shareholder at Maggio & Cater. We're an immigration law firm that's based in Washington, D.C., with offices in Ohio, California, and D.C. Our practice is really focused on business immigration, but we handle all sorts of immigration. This past year has been, I think Liz will agree, a challenge in many different ways. So we're looking forward to talking with you about the changes that are upcoming that we anticipate.
Thanks, Jim. And Liz, say.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. So Liz Jamay, I'm based in San Francisco, one of the founding partners of Corporate Immigration Partners, where we focus exclusively on business immigration. However, I started in 2007 in deportations, asylum, family-based. So I've kind of run the gamut of immigration law. And yeah, echoing Jim, I mean, it's just been, 2020 has been an interesting year, to say the least, just trying to keep people, the movement of people into the US and vice versa to the rest of the world, and happy to be here. Sophie, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. I am so excited to have you both here at the same time. It's totally amazing. So a couple of tiny housekeeping things. What I think will be best is if people have questions, then stick them in the Q&A box, and I'm going to keep an eye on those and just chuck them into the conversation as and when needed. If we can't answer them all, then we'll try and get to them afterwards and email people. If you have really specific or specific situations with kind of personal information, we won't be able to answer those, obviously, but we can try and look at them separately and later. And I think everybody's on mute. We're probably going to keep everybody on mute just so that we can, keep things going. But and I think that's it. So I thought everybody's really keen to know what is going on with the Biden administration and what changes can we expect to see and how things are going to move from there. But I thought, or we all thought, it might be helpful to first start with a summary of where we are now, so what's going on now. And I think the key question that certainly a lot of people ask me is, are people actually even allowed into the US at the moment anyway? Can we travel? What's going on with that?
So the short answer is yes. People are allowed into the US, but over the past year, it's become increasingly more difficult to obtain the necessary documentation that one needs in order to travel to the US if you're not a permanent resident or a citizen of this country. And if we look at the last year, I think it's really interesting to see all the things that happened in the last year that really changed the way we have to practice and advise our clients. First, with the onset of COVID, we saw the consulates start closing in, I think that was February. Yeah. It's all kind of a blur to me, but in February, the consulates closed. They stayed closed until June, and then we saw slow reopening. And even today, it can be challenging depending on which country you're in. You might have a delay in getting a visa appointment for months. And if you look at the appointment availability on the State Department website, it will tell you the wait time, the normal wait time for this type of visa is 999 days, which basically means that they can't, their system doesn't go to 1,000. So it's up to 999 days. And what that really means is they're doing this on a limited basis. You have to have really good reasons to get an appointment. And often the appointment won't be for months. And then you have to go back to the consulate and say, please, this is really urgent. You need to be able to make a very strong case for your client that the person should be seen soon. And a number of factors can be taken into consideration. But that was the first thing. The consulate started closing. And then we had this series of presidential proclamations, which basically said, if you're coming from any of these countries, you are restricted from traveling unless you're a permanent resident or a citizen, or you have close family members who are permanent residents or citizens, or you fall in certain categories. But everyone else was restricted from traveling. And those countries were China, Iran, then the Schengen region, the UK, Ireland, Brazil, and we're going to talk about what's new under the Biden administration. So I'll leave the last country for that part of the discussion. But suddenly, no one could travel directly from these countries, and we were having to, Liz, I don't know about you, maybe you have some funny stories about where do we go if we want to come to the US and we don't think we qualify for a national interest exception. Did you have clients trying to figure that out?
Definitely some strange conversations, right? I think 2020 was the year of just being able to live with uncertainty and just think of every crazy place you could send someone, right? And park them for a few weeks. And even then there might be issues. So absolutely, Jim, I think that going back to the embassy timing, the embassies, it's been really crazy to see that, you'll have a client that does actually have maybe is lucky to get an appointment at the end of the year. And then what I've seen in a few instances is the embassy calls them and says, hey, can you come in tomorrow? And so you have to be prepared for anything. And I think that was the lesson we learned this year. Just be prepared for anything.
So let me understand. So firstly, embassies were all super delayed and difficult to get an appointment. So that's for people who need visas, right? So either a visa national, like somebody from India or China or whatever, or somebody who needs a work visa. And then you talked about like this concept of kind of telling people to go somewhere and like park them there for a while. And that was because of the COVID restrictions on the home country. So say I'm from the UK and I'm not allowed in, maybe I go and spend a couple of weeks in Mexico or somewhere, right? Like that was and presumably that was like a moving puzzle the whole time, like where you could put them. And then what if you send somebody to somewhere to wait it out and effectively kind of quarantine while on holiday, and then that country gets added to your no-go list? Like, did that happen as well?
We always advise clients of the risk. They want to look at countries that have low infection rates. But also this seemed to be somewhat politically motivated. It seemed odd that Russia and India were not on the list, but the Schengen region was. And so there was a little bit of unpredictability, and you would always want to caution the client. We can't guarantee that these countries are going to stay off the list, right?
Yeah.
And what was really important also is that they count the days accurately. We had someone come to us after they were sent back. They landed in the US, and the person said, you spent 13 days and 20 hours in Turkey. You didn't spend 14 days. And so they were returned because they hadn't spent a full 14 days outside of the Schengen region. So
right now you still have this travel ban where people from, so there's still a bunch of countries on that list, right? Including most of the Schengen area, well, the Schengen area and the UK, presumably. So if I personally wanted to now come and visit my friend Liz in San Francisco, how would I do that? Like I can't, right? If I wanted to just come and have a drink with you,
get out your
by the way,
map.
I do.
Get out your map, Sophie.
Yeah, where's my map?
And
Trip around the world.
Right.
we find a country that isn't on the list. Turkey's not on the list, Croatia. There's a number of countries, but then you can't transit back through the restricted countries, right?
Yeah.
Or you might be able to go to the US Embassy in London and send them an email and say, I need to meet with my friend Liz because we have some really great opportunities that are going to create economic opportunities in the US. And therefore, my visit is in the national interest. I'm not, I don't have a visa in my passport, so I'm coming in on ESTA. And what I'm going to be doing is strictly business. I'm not going to actually engage in work. But my meetings are really critical to the national recovery. And so you could ask for a national interest exception on those grounds.
Would they give me one?
It's discretionary, and we've had a lot of success, knock on wood. But it really depends on the consulate. I would say that Brazil is so difficult to get a national interest exception out of, whereas the consulates in Europe tend to be really good. And in London, it tends to be really good. Some of the challenges are, if you're in Italy, well, the consulates there are, when you send them a national interest exception, they will say, basically, don't bother us for 60 days because they are so backlogged. Whereas London, and this is always perplexing to me because London tends to be a fortress and the delays usually occur there. We get decisions back within a week, but you can't forum shop. You got to go, if you are residing in a country, you go to the consulate where you're residing. Let's say you have a visa in your passport, let's say you're an L1 visa holder and you need to get back to the US, then you go to the consulate that has jurisdiction over or that issued the visa. And so a lot of times for our Italian employees, we have to go to Italy to request that. And Liz, I don't know about what you've been doing, but what we calendar all national interest exception requests, and we wait 14 days. And then once we have 14 days, we go to, well, first about 12 or 13 days later, we send a nice reminder to the consulate and explain to them again the national importance of the individual's visit. But then we'll go to a CBP, the CBP office where the person's going to land in the US. And we like JFK a lot because they handle a lot of these and they're very, very good. We go to them and say, it's been 14 days. Will you please take a look at this? This person's visit is urgent. And we've tried to follow up with the consulate. They're too busy. And can you please approve this? And we've had a lot of success in getting that approved. One of the things, just remind us, we want to talk about is that the Biden administration has made some changes that has caused a little bit of a hiccup with this little strategy. So we have these COVID travel restrictions, and then President Trump, this seemed again to be a bit political. He said, well, I think that L1, H1, and J1 trainees and interns are taking jobs away from US workers. And during this crisis that was brought on by the pandemic, I'm going to suspend the issuance of new L1, new H's, new J's. So individuals who have not previously held these statuses were not, the consulates could not issue visas for them unless their work was again in the national interest.
Okay, so let me just make sure that I'm understanding everything right. So we've talked about business travel, pure business travel, and actually Fiona had a question there in the Q&A. What the heck is business travel? Like, how do you define what the difference?
Fiona, why do you have to ask that? Fiona's always causing trouble. Liz, do you want to take a stab at that one first?
Yeah,
or-
Liz, what's
Sure,
business?
absolutely. What is business travel? Well, again, I think it depends on what embassy you're going to, right? What jurisdiction you're in. Typically, the argument that we like to make for our clients is that it will, like Jim said, it has some sort of economic impact to the U.S. That's been the strongest argument the last, 4 years. And always, a lot if you can connect it somehow to the pandemic relief, the COVID relief
Yeah.
response, that's great. And oddly enough, you can do that in many different ways, thinking outside the box. But anything that really you can convince an officer that will add to the economy of the US, that's what a business travel is. Or a pertinent meeting that is going to cost, if you don't make, it's going to cost your company a big financial hit. So finance is always the right way to go, I think, right, Jim?
Money, follow the money. Okay,
Oh.
so all right, so business travel. So what we're saying is right now, business travel, if you're coming from a travel ban country, of which there are many, then you've got to prove why you're, of benefit to the US, basically, why there's a national interest for you to come. If you need to get a visa because you're a person who needs to get a visa. So if you're an ESTA, if you're a visa waiver person, you don't necessarily get a visa, but you have to get a national interest exception. And if you need a visa on top of that, you might have to wait 999 or some, extensive amount of time before you can get your visa. And that's the situation now. And then let's move on to the work visas. But should we just, while we're talking about business travel, should we just talk a bit about Biden and what might change? Because there was quite a lot of confusion about that in the last few days, because people, I think they thought the travel bans were going away and then they came back and then they don't know. So let's just quickly talk about what we think might happen there.
So just before Trump left office, his administration announced that as of January 26th, the COVID-related travel bans were going to be lifted for the Schengen region, UK, Ireland.
And why? Why was he saying that when we're all completely infected?
Because
he just
liked to stir trouble.
Maybe.
January 26th, he was no longer in office. He was saying,
So it's like, it's fine, you deal with it.
Administration, a little present. And within, I think it was an hour, the press secretary for the transition said, that's not happening. Those restrictions are going to stay in place. And so there was all this excitement, and everyone thought, oh, they're not going to apply to us anymore. And in fact, we had to give them the bad news that no, they were going to apply. And if anything, Liz, I don't know, what do you advise your clients now when you're looking in your crystal ball? I just keep on hearing the campaign and how they really hit the Trump administration for not being responsible enough in managing the spread. My anticipation is that it's going to get more difficult and there's going to be more countries added to the list as opposed to countries being taken off the list.
I think so too. I do. And now we people coming in as of the 26th have to have a negative COVID test, which I think we all agree is probably a positive step in the right direction for any country, right? And I agree, Jim. I think it will get tougher. I don't think that we will see a loosening probably of restrictions until the end of this year. Now that's different than sending someone to get a work visa stamp in their passport, right? So I think that's going to change. We can talk about that in a little bit. But as far as like COVID restrictions, yes, I think this administration will tighten down the borders.
Yeah. So for the foreseeable future, we don't expect that I can come on my holidays and see my friends or even have a business meeting unless I can really prove that it's super, super important.
Yes. I mean, people still, Jim, I'm sure you get these emails. Hey, I need to be in New York on, today, or they'll say, I need to be in New York in 2 weeks. The days of being in New York in 2 weeks are gone right now. Right. And we have to be super flexible. So I think setting expectations is the number one job that we have right now.
And are there exceptions? So this is we've got to remember that we're talking about travel ban countries. And presumably if you're a US national or a permanent resident, then you're fine. You can still get on your plane as long as you can find a plane that's flying and and come home. And if you're coming from Mexico or Canada or something, then okay.
Well, so Canada and Mexico, if you're driving across the border, then you could have challenges. You have to show that your visit is for essential business purposes. Whereas if you fly in, you generally are not questioned. And
Okay.
so we have had a number of folks, and I think I wanted to make sure I mentioned this. It goes back to Fiona's question, well, what's business? And there is this exception that we've used a lot lately for after sales services. We've been able to bring in a lot of folks on ESTA and get a national interest exception because they needed to come into the US to either repair, install, maintain, or train US workers on a product that was manufactured outside of the US. And so sometimes some companies want us to go directly to the CBP or to the consulate and ask for the national interest exception and have them come in. Others will say, I'll send them to Mexico. We actually have some work in Mexico that they need to do first, or Canada's pretty tough to get into these days, but they'll go to Mexico, they'll be there for more than 14 days, and then they'll apply for admission on ESTA based upon the after sales service agreement. But those, you really want to make sure you're documenting well, that you have copies of the agreement in place, you know, that for them to present when they're applying, and also evidence of their specialized skills, because the regulations do require or contemplate that the person who's coming in, even though they might not be your employee, is someone who has specialized skills and is going to be able to perform those duties that are either installation, maintenance, repair, or training.
And do you think things that you're managing to get through like this now, do you think that door might close with Biden being a bit, Liz, I think you were gonna.
Well,
oh, that's tricky for Mexico. Mexico's a tricky one, right? I mean, they've seen a lot of activity. We have been, a lot of our companies have been parking people there. Time zone concerns are kind of gone. We've had a lot of success getting people across. But I don't know. I think Mexico's one that's very I think actually Canada and Mexico are very political. So if the administration moves to tighten the borders on either in North or South, I think that has ramifications that are beyond immigration, right? What do you think, Ben?
Well, I just saw an article. I didn't read I saw the headline yesterday that said that Mexico's economy contracted by 8.8% since COVID. So, and this administration seems to be striking a tone that is much more friendly in recognizing the special relationship that we have with Mexico on from an immigration standpoint. So I would be surprised that they would become more restrictionist. I do think that customs and border protection and consulates seem to be much more comfortable with after sales services right now than before COVID. Like there were times when we would just say, you have an agreement in place, but you're real that consulate, they're not very receptive to this, or they generally want someone to have the visa, work visa. And we've seen a lot more flexibility.
That's interesting.
That's a good point, Jim, because I think we're going to have to wait, and we'll talk about this in the second half, but it's not going to be overnight that everything changes, especially at the consulates and the borders, because it takes 12-18 months to kind of cycle through some new headcount, some new individuals, and so it's going to be a little bit slow going. What do you think?
I agree, and I think everyone should prepare for June, because June is when the new officers come on board, and so you might get some really wacky decisions from consulates that have no basis in law or reality.
So they have a big change around, do they?
Yeah, and London got hit hard last time. There was a big change. Remember that?
Yes.
We were just like, what's going on?
So the kind of identity and the character of friendly consulate, unfriendly, whatever, might completely reverse.
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk about work visas, because we've got about half an hour left. So So this is business travel. So we've kind of gone into quite a lot of detail. So how about work visas? So right now, or pre any Biden change, somebody who has I think we should talk about existing work visa holders and people trying to get new work visas. So if I have an L1 or an H1, or I have some type of work visa, and I come home to the UK, and then COVID happens and I want to come back again, can I? Like, what do I have to do?
Well, your HR or global mobility person will reach out to their immigration counsel, and we need to look at a few things, right? Because, well, do you have a valid visa in your passport? Do you still have a petition that's valid, right?
Yeah. So the petition is like the kind of work permission in the first place, right? Like the thing you get before you get the visa.
Right.
Yeah.
So the visa gets you on the plane and allows you to apply for admission, but you have to, in most cases, if you're coming in on a work authorized visa status, you have to have an underlying approved petition for the customs agent to let you in. So we're going to look at those things, because if you don't have an underlying petition that's valid, then we need to go to immigration and say, we'd like to have another H or another L, unless you're dealing with an E, right? E's are different, they're special. We go to the consulate. If you don't have a valid E visa in your passport, then we go to the consulate and say we need to apply for a new E visa before the person comes in. And sometimes, Liz, I don't know if you've had the situation, but we've seen people where they've been on an L, but we haven't, they have E eligibility, and it might be faster to get an appointment for an E or vice versa for an L. And so we'll switch them up.
Absolutely. I was about to say that. And it's interesting because timing always will make a difference in the decisions, because each consulate has a different time for processing of an E. But the other thing too, we love E visas. I think, Jim, I think you do too, right? They're almost no brainers, right? They're almost guaranteed. And even during this time of kind of a crackdown, E's have been kind of the lifeblood of some movement. So, and getting approvals, and L's have traditionally, even before this administration, have always been, I mean, ever since I've been practicing, L's have been difficult. So yes, absolutely love the E visa, especially out of London. London's still been, the last 4 years, there was one time when the kind of the character of the embassy did change, and we had to send a lot of emails for a few months to get things moving again, but it's been pretty steady.
Okay, but why would I need to get a new E visa if I've already got one? If I've already got one, I can just
if it's expired.
But if it's expired, okay. And then how about if I want a completely new thing? So my client wants to send their, 6 people from various different countries to the US. Do I tell them, sorry, forget about it, or can they do it?
There's still opportunity, and there might be more layers, but first of all, for everyone in the audience, if you have clients that are large multinationals, the first thing you want to ask the company is, do you have a blanket out petition in place? Because this is so valuable to multinational companies. With a blanket out petition in place, you can save them months of process and thousands of dollars on each transfer. Because with the blanket L petition in place, we don't have to, for someone who's eligible for L classification, we don't have to go to immigration and get an individual petition approved. And so Liz, I think the average size of an L1 petition submission to immigration would be, I don't know, maybe about this big these days. It's just
400 pages plus.
Yeah.
It's like an 01.
And you're still going to get a request for evidence. But if you have this blanket out petition in place, we don't have to go to immigration, and the size of the submission it's really minimal, right?
Okay.
The consulate requires in terms of evidence is much less than the USCIS. And so everyone reach out to your clients, ask them if they have blanket out petitions in place, because you're going to look like a rock star, because if you can save them all this time and kind of unravel the complexity. And if they don't have one, and they're a large company and they have more than 25 million in annual revenue in the US coming out of the US, then you should advocate for them to get one, because they will save. I think on the second or third L1 petition, they're going to start saving money on their transfers.
That's right. And the same with the E2s, because if a company doesn't have an E2 registration and they do qualify for it, the savings in filing fees alone, if you can get a lot of the individuals on E2s into the US, it's tremendous. So you would also be a rock star if you could save the company. I mean, it practically cuts their immigration cost in half if they're heavily relying on Ls.
Especially in London. I mean,
yeah.
You know, Italy, like this is the funny thing.
Italy's a different story.
Yeah, E's are like, they're like the consulate's turf, right? You know, and each
they get to choose
has their own rules. And so Italy, you have to be on the vetted company list, and no one knows. It's a state secret how you get on the vetted company list. You know, we have some large multinational companies that do billions of dollars in trade in the US, and they can't get on the list. But some of their some subsidiaries will be on the list and others won't. It's a head scratcher.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk more about Joe Biden. So far we've talked about business travel, issues getting in, how you can manage it, the fact that we think Biden's probably not going to open that up anytime soon. In fact, he's more likely to go the other way. How about, because, you know, my perspective, which is extremely ignorant about all of this, but he seemed so much more open to kind of immigration and, you know, friends in other countries, and a bit less kind of protectionist. So what, you know, and there have been news stories about him opening things up a little bit, right? So what are the kind of, I guess, positive things that we might expect, and when might things change in a useful way?
So they were supposed to do a review of business immigration. There was a leak that came out that gave his calendar, and it said that they were going to do a review of immigration on January 29th. But we just received an email saying that it's now.
Oh, I think, did we lose
He's
Jim?
frozen. He's frozen.
So,
there he is.
There he is.
You froze him, just as you were saying. You said,
you
said it's gonna, you know, you said the review was going to be the 29th, and now it's going to be, and then nobody.
I think I need to say in advance that all 4 of my kids just started their online school, and this is about the time that my Wi-Fi crashes. So just a heads up.
Yeah, that's fine. I should say, actually, this is the time my children finish their online school. So although my Wi-Fi is okay, there may be some significant external noise factors.
That's why I keep going on mute. Anytime I can, because I can hear my kid's teacher. I'm just, please don't.
Yeah. I know, I'm like, shut up.
So,
anyway, sorry, carry on, Jim. Oh, he's gone again.
Oh no. There he is. You're back.
In general, yeah. I would say in general, Sophie, that Joe Biden has his worldview is one of openness, and that we are better as a country when we have the exchange of ideas and technology and resources across borders. And you know, America becomes, you know, better as a result, as opposed to closing our borders. So generally, I think that
generally the concept is there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just this is why I had that musical interlude.
Yes, explain your music choices, please, to us.
Okay. So I asked Sophie to have this musical interlude, because this is a piece of Americana. Liz and we grew up on Saturday mornings watching cartoons, and in between cartoons, they would have this schoolhouse rock that taught us the legislative process. That explains how laws are passed in the US. And it's so different. If you live in a country where you have a parliamentary system, where you elect a party that, you know, and that party then passes their plan, what happens in the US, right? Each party might have a platform, or this year, one party had a platform and the other one said whatever. But you have a platform, and then you have to negotiate all of this out. You have to build consensus, and not only you have to build consensus both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And those are completely different bodies and different mentalities, right, within those bodies. So they have to come together, they have to pass the legislation, and if it doesn't match up perfectly, then they have to negotiate it out. So this is why things don't happen so quickly in the US. We might have a different party in power, but the legislation that basically is the
So the legislation takes
underpinning
some
for US
time, right?
It was passed in
Yeah.
1965. Yeah. And so it's really antiquated, and we just keep on amending it as opposed to passing sweeping immigration reform. I think.
But what about all
So
these
yeah,
executive?
Liz,
Yeah, like the executive orders. So then
Yeah,
there's
what about all these
so there's
executive
the-
orders? Yeah.
There's the legislative change that most immigration attorneys would love to see, right? Because then it's something that is solid and we know that it's consistent and we can plan around that. But then there's these executive orders. And for many years now, and I can't recall when executive orders started really being a thing for our presidents, but there are some things that the US presidents can quickly sign and affect people coming in and work visas and some rules around our H-1Bs. Those are really tricky because that's certain areas you can affect and some you can't. And then it gets locked up. I mean, for years now, we've been locked up in court for a number of things that have come up through these executive orders, but they are effective immediately when they're signed. And so the first day that Biden came into office, he did reverse quite a few of these executive orders. The biggest one being the ban on the Muslim countries. That was huge. And I think all of us have seen the family impact that's caused. I personally am married to an Iranian. So our whole family has been directly impacted. With his grandmother, is in her late 90s and we'll probably never see her. Hopefully we might, but significant impacts. There was a stay in deportations. Although I think there was a court, Jim, was there a court case that reversed that and then, or stopped it? And then now we still have a stay on the deportations, right?
Right. So yeah, there is some immigration judge that is trying to basically
Texas.
overturn the Biden decision to put a halt on deportations.
So Biden wanted to halt deportations and then somebody else is trying to overturn that.
He wants to put a temporary hold so that there can be a review, because there was a lot of fast tracking of deportations under the past administration.
Okay.
So he wants to reassess. And then DACA. So that's been that will remain in place. So that was, I'm trying to remember all the ones. So DACA, deportation, travel bans, the Liberian nationals, and then
the asylum process and forcing people to stay outside the U.S. They're seeking refuge through political asylum, and then we force them to stay in Mexico while we process their application.
And Biden's overturned that one as well. He's changed that one. So he's signed a bunch of immigration-related stuff already, which is, I mean, both kind of pretty impactful, but also really surely signaling a huge intention to be more open as well, right?
Yeah,
right. So day one. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was going to say, I think that on the humanitarian side, it's easier for him to make these changes than on the business side, because it's regulatory. A lot of the business immigration is regulatory. Even though it's not new legislation, he has to introduce for public comment proposed rule changes, and those they have to receive the public comments for regulations, and then they can issue a final rule. So it's a longer process. But some of the really recent regulations that the Trump administration either introduced or finalized, they are able to put a hold on, and we have seen them say, if there's a regulation that has not been finalized, we're putting a hold on that. If it was recently promulgated, then we're going to put a 60-day hold so that we can review them, right?
Okay.
So we do anticipate some of that. And Liz, I think your clients are probably asking you the same thing about H-1Bs and, how does this,
There's
What
a
do we
new
do?
thing about H1Bs, right? Yeah.
Right. So we were very nervous actually, because this would significantly impact and cost our companies a lot of money.
So what is it? Tell us what the new thing is to start
An
with.
auction. It's an auction. But
Did you say it's an auction?
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. So it just it changed the way that USCIS would choose who they were picking in the lottery, and they were going to go with the highest wage level. So at H1B, there's multiple wage levels, and we typically, generally you sit around that wage level 2, which is reasonable and kind of goes along the lines of what people are getting paid geographically, US citizens are. So, but the new rules stated that they would choose from the highest wage levels, and there is a significant difference. Just mind-boggling difference, and that's not even reality, right? And so those were put on hold, and it's I think the deadline is right up against the H1. It comes in the end of March. And but we're not expecting to see that be pushed through, right, Jim?
right, correct.
Yeah.
We anticipate that they're going to issue the instructions to hold it for 60 days, and so that the Biden administration can review it, and then there will probably be a lawsuit, and some court will enjoin the enforcement, and then the Biden administration could just say we don't oppose. They could just let it die, essentially.
So this was about H1s, and because there's a cap and they never all get approved. So this was about the ones that would be approved would be the ones that had a higher wage, right? So then effectively, basically kind of cancelling H1s for lower wage people because they never would get up to the top, right? So then if you were working in a charity or like anything where the wages are lower, then like it's unfortunate. But then you think it's not going to happen after all, right?
Right.
No,
And what was crazy was, like, if you had an employer who has deep pockets, well, they could just increase all their salaries so that they, even for their level, their entry positions, they'd have a greater chance of getting selected. Whereas if you're, and I think of the non-immigrant visa as a great way for startup companies to be able to bring in talent, energetic and excited about the opportunity. Well, you've just priced them out of the H1B category, right? So it's because they are not going to be able to say, oh, I'll throw $150,000 at this tech worker because that's the level 4 wage for a computer systems analyst in the Bay Area. And I'm probably even off on that.
The good news is on the green card side. So there's a process called the PERM, and it's how we get green cards for employees, and there had been like the huge push to raise the wage levels. So we just got through a big round of redeterminations, and they're all getting approved. So we're kind of back to the normal way of processing. So that's exciting. I think if the other thing is this spousal visas for H4. And so Biden is definitely going to bring that back. It's been a huge issue for a lot of individuals. In fact, I saw an interesting statistic. 90% of those affected were Indian nationals. 93% were women. So I found that astonishing.
So 93% of the H1B holder was a woman.
93% of the spouses.
Oh, the spouses were women. Oh, of course they were.
Yeah. Sit on H4s, and their work authorization has been threatened. And it was just fascinating because just in general, women in the workforce have taken a huge hit with the pandemic. They have been especially vulnerable now, and so that's super exciting to be able to get them some comfort.
And when will that happen then? So is this one of these things that might take 12 months, 18 months, 2 years?
He just took it off the table.
He just took it off the table. Yeah.
But Liz, there's I was thinking about this. This is something that everyone should understand. So we've been able to continue to file H4 EADs and L2 EADs. But the process, when you have someone who's in the US and already has an H4 or an L2 EAD, the process has become exponentially more difficult and more time consuming because under the previous administration, they introduced this rule that, well, first of all, historically what we would do would be, let's say you had an H-1B worker and an H-4 spouse. Well, we would file the H-1B petition and the H-4 extension application along with the work permit all together. And you could ask for premium processing of the H-1B petition. And often the examiner would just take the whole case and approve everything at once, right? So we could make sure that the spouse continued to have that employment authorization. Under the prior administration, what they did was they said, okay, well, we're going to create 2 product lines, and the H-1B petition is going to go over to one examiner, and the H-4 extension and EAD application.
The spouse work thing, yeah.
And we're going to make the H-4 spouse go get a fingerprint, give their fingerprints, further delaying the process, right? And so the adjudication wouldn't start until the H-1B had been approved, and then the H-4 extension would be adjudicated. So suddenly, instead of taking like 90 days, it's now taking 6 months or so to get an EAD, and so you inevitably will have these gaps in employment authorization. So hopefully that will be something that the administration will say, this makes no sense. Let's have everything adjudicated once again. And give the ability to make sure that the spouses remain employment authorized. So in my crystal ball, if I were to wish for something, that's what I would wish for.
100%. It's just been this vicious cycle. It's just constant renewal, constantly being backlogged, constantly not knowing, going off payroll, then doing it all over again. So I think that the administration is very in tune with the issues with processing times, because we've had issues across all aspects of all different types of cases. And I'm hoping and I'm hopeful that they'll look into that and be practical and staff accordingly.
Okay. All right. So basically you're expecting, so a lot of, it seems like also a lot of the change that we're talking about now is not so much change as averting imminent change, right? So the H-4 thing was a thing that had been kind of threatening, like a dark cloud kind of waiting there, and now it's not going to happen. And then the H-1, the salary being such a big part of it, that actually never happened either, but was sort of ominously pending, and now it's not going to. But what about kind of bigger change? Like, do you think, is it possible now that, especially after the whole thing in Georgia, like, Biden has the control or the authority that Obama never had, right? Does he have a bit more? Like, could he do more? Like, could he actually change things up more than just overturning and reversing some of the Trump decisions?
I'll start this, and then Jim, I'll let you finish. But my quick thoughts are, major immigration reform has been a minefield for many, many years. It's come up, we've been hopeful, and it's fallen apart, and it's because it does need to have bipartisan support. I feel like, given what 2020 brought and the need to bolster the economy, we probably will get that, but it may be piecemeal again. So, Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. They announced this proposal that was going to be sweeping immigration reform, one bill to cover everything from humanitarian immigration to business-related immigration. And some of it was great. They were going to eliminate these quotas on green cards, and everyone would be happy. But the reality is that even though you have a majority, technically, you have some Democratic senators that are from the states that, have a lot of blue-collar workers, or
a lot of unemployment. West
Virginia. So those senators are vulnerable. So you have to. It's unfortunately, it's just not as clean cut. And Biden has already indicated, I'd be willing to do this in pieces, right, as opposed to one sweeping set of reforms. So we're kind of still waiting to see how this pans out.
And I guess his whole thing is to try and bring people together. So he doesn't want to do too crazy,
That's what I was going to say, Sophie. He is known. He's been in for he's been in politics for 50 years now.
100 years, yeah.
And he's not I do think that his administration is going to rely on those relationships, right? So he has quite a bit of political capital to spend, and and there's plenty, I mean, I think there's plenty to spend. So I do think that we'll see some movement. I do think there's quite a bit of support for the, 11 million undocumented immigrants that will probably have a pathway to citizenship. I do think that's has a lot of support. I think that some stabilization and some relief in the backlog of green cards, I think that has, so again, I think that we will see some significant movement forward in U.S. immigration policy, but we may never actually see full blown reform. I don't know. It's a tough call.
Yeah.
I think it's positive though. I think we need to look at, moving towards the end of 2021 and going into 2022. I think that companies will drive a lot of this growth and drive a lot of the policy, and they really want to get going again. Right. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good positive note. So let me see. We've got a few questions here. So some of them date back to the beginning of this conversation. So this is a really good one about the travel ban, about vaccinations. So Gennady says, what about, do you think, because, actually I was talking to some people, well, I wasn't talking to anybody. I was doing some LinkedIn talking to some people about, vaccination part. International SOS has got a new vaccination, like an app thing, and that they're being kind of developed. Like, do you think, has there been any talk about that travel ban might be lifted once people can prove they've got a vaccination, like a valid,
Oh, I think so. I'm pretty positive about that. And I think there's quite a few international big companies that are working on universal smartphone apps. Have to be, careful about the security. What do you think, Jim?
I think that might be a good way to start introducing, lifting, is if we can be certain of the negative results, then I think that there's, they could lift it. We were talking yesterday, well, with this testing that now is required, I wasn't clear, you have to get the test within 72 hours. Well, if it's not the quick test, that by the time you get the result, the negative result,
actually, do tell us a bit more about that test. So you have to have the test before you come, right? And then do you have to have another test once you arrive? Because a lot of countries around the world, that's how it works. You have it 72 hours before, or within 72 hours before, and then once you arrive, you have to have another one before you can exit quarantine. But you guys just have the one before.
We just have the one before.
And Liz, I don't know if you get this question all the time, and I feel bad, but we are always getting questions like, my client is flying into JFK. Does he have to quarantine? And that's not an immigration. It's not a U.S. immigration.
No, it's not. It's not. It's like a logistical question.
And Liz and I, our licenses are state specific or they're practice specific. So we would love to help, but our hands are tied. We can't go beyond what we're authorized to advise on, and we have to often say, that's beyond our scope. We can't, here's the helpful information you want to look at. But it is state specific. There is no quarantine requirement associated with the national interest exception or immigration. Now, I always tell folks, listen, you're asking for an exception that is enforced because of a pandemic. So if you're going to be irresponsible, then you're not likely to get the exception. So if there are local requirements that you need to practice social distancing or quarantine, you better plan on doing that.
Or you're not exactly in the national interest, are you? So let's see. We had another one from Sari. Hi, Sari, which is about the L1 blankets. So because you guys were recommending get the L1 blanket, and are those are going through okay at the moment? Are they those L1 blanket applications? They're not delayed.
So maybe we should just break this down a little bit. Okay, there's getting the blanket in place, which involves going to U.S. immigration and getting approval, and that's pretty quick. You have to show that the company has at least, the U.S. petitioner has at least 3 entities around the world that are doing business, and the U.S. entity has been doing business for at least 1 year, and that the company in the U.S. either has over 25 million in annual revenue, or that it has a workforce of more than 1,000 employees in the U.S., or that in the past year they brought in at least 10 Ls to the US. Now, because of COVID, that's going to be a little challenging, right? To get 12 in the last year. So we usually go with the 25 million in annual revenue. Once that blanket's in place, then if you can get an appointment at a consulate and you have a good,
but then you have to get the appointment at the consulate. Yeah.
And you have a good national interest argument, then you have, you know, the makings of a situation where you can get an L visa. If you're outside of the Schengen region, UK, Ireland, China, Iran, or Brazil or South Africa, then you also don't have the COVID travel restrictions. You can go, you know, and if the consulate is open, you can get an L visa. At that point, you're going to have to prove that your work in the US is in the national interest. And there's great guidelines on the State Department website as to what situations the consulates will consider in determining whether someone's work is in the national interest. And that's where Liz and I come in. And you know, we're happy to help advise on those issues.
Cool, that's helpful. And then when it comes to consulates, so Fiona had a question about consulates. I think Fiona actually had to leave, but we should answer this anyway because it's a good one. She says, which consulates, you know, she says, do you think there are going to be preferred countries for upcoming US applications? So I think that is about which consulates, you know, and then she says also, what about the one in India? So I guess this is kind of two things. One of them is what you were saying before about consulates changing over their staff in June anyway, I guess, right? And people can't pick and choose where they're going to apply. They have to apply where they're resident. I think maybe you guys actually already answered that one. But then how about India? What's the scoop with India? Is it one of the slow ones, or is it okay? Slow.
Yeah, India and China in particular, because they have quite a few consulates and each one is different. Jim, I have a little bit more experience in China. What about you in India?
We have not, yeah, we've had a few visas.
Yeah, we haven't had anything.
Through India, but the pandemic have tended to stay closed or have very, very limited appointments.
We've kept all of our Indian nationals in the country.
Don't travel.
Don't let them out in case they can't come back, right?
No, I never, you know, I feel for them so badly. It's been a lot of them haven't been home in years. You know, they're always planning to go next year, and then this came. So, but we've just kept everyone in the country.
Now, importantly, if let's say you have an H-1B worker and they have a valid H-1B visa in their passport and they have an approved petition with your company, then they don't need to go to the consulate. They have the visa in their passport. They have the underlying petition. They just need to get a flight. And even that has been challenging. And then you don't want to go through the Schengen region or, you know, any of the restricted countries and getting yourself back here.
So we have a comment here from Amberly. Thanks, Amberly, and hi, Amberly. So Amberly's at McAfee, and she says she has had some good success recently in India, including H1. So that's good. Which consulates was that, Amberly? Which cities was it in? Chennai, it says. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. That's useful.
Great. Yeah, that's great news. I was trying to chat her back saying that's great, but I don't think we have the ability.
I don't know how to do that either. I'm just like saying it all out loud. And then we have literally 1 minute left. So Stefano, I didn't want to leave your question unanswered. Stefano says, do you think the processing time might change with the new administration? It's so hard because of the COVID is like in there as well, right? So, but what do you think?
I think I mean, look, the officers have been operating remote. What we also have to remember is that, from my understanding, they're still going to the service centers, picking up files, taking them home. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So, yes, a lot of things revolve around how successfully we get people back into the office. But I do think in general, over the next 12 to 18 months, we'll see a pickup in processing. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to see processing time speed up. Right, Jim?
Yeah, so on the USCIS side, yes. On the consular side, you know, the situation at the consulates, it's really driven country by country. Yeah. And I think this administration is going to be focused on the science more than the prior administration. So if we have an uptick in cases, I would also say that the consulates are going to have fewer appointments available. What's happened, even though they opened, you know, they're really restricting the number of people that can be in the consulate at any one time. They're spacing people out. They're having a lot of their folks work from home. And so that is, I think that's more difficult to predict than USCIS because so much of it's automated. And as long as the consulates continue to insist on in-person interviews. Now, if you have a renewal, you know, and you qualify for the mail-in option that's available in a lot of consulates, there you have a better chance of getting you know, the visa application process time.
That's a great point, Jim. Remember the mail-in option. A lot of people don't think about that, and
and you expect it to be slower, right? You would expect it to be slower mailing it in, but actually it can be faster.
Oh, it's great. It's a great option. So you're right, Jim. I think that outside it'll ebb and flow based on the numbers, which is so frustrating. It's so frustrating. But just always remember that you can get that random call and say, so what I've been telling my clients is your appointment may be 8 months from now, but please get those passport photos ready.
Yeah, and keep an eye on your phone in case it rings, right? So do you guys have any, I think we need to finish, but do you have any parting, like if you had one thing that you wanted to say to everybody, what would be your last word of advice or, you know, warning or positive comment?
Jim, let you go first.
Okay, so
what's your tagline, Jim?
When you're asking for these exceptions, be strategic. You know, use this for those people that are highly qualified, are really urgently needed in the U.S. And that goes for the national interest exceptions or the national interest waivers associated with L's, H's, and J's, and for emergency appointments, because the consulates are getting slammed right now with all sorts of requests. So you want yours to distinctly, you know, be set apart. And we have an attorney in our office that she is the master of, you know, presenting cases.
I think I know who you mean. Yeah.
Just tear on the heartstrings.
All right.
But you have to have facts to support it. As the founder of our firm said,
be strategic, support it with facts. Don't ask for it for everyone.
Right.
All right.
Well, I think I'll keep it really simple. You know, plan really far in advance, stay flexible, and stay positive.
Yep.
That's basically the best life advice I think any of us could also ask for at this moment, you know?
Right.
So thank you so much. And I like totally, look, I had a script which I didn't stick to in any way. So thank you both for being so amazing and flexible and positive. Dom, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you actually hear me? Because I can't see myself.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I can't switch my camera back on for some reason. Or maybe I can do it down here. Listen, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. It is an absolute minefield. And Sophie, if you're okay with it, I mean, I'd love to come back to this. We're doing another virtual event in April, May. And again, I think by that time we'll know more. I mean, you just prompted me to go and check my ESTA application expiration, which unfortunately is September. And that just brought a kind of, do you think that ESTAs might be revoked if there is a requirement for vaccination proof?
Oh, good question.
I think that the ESTA is not likely to be revoked unless you can't prove the vaccination, right? I mean, what do you think, Liz? Would they? I mean, everything's computerized. They could always check in and say, "Have you been vaccinated?"
It would be ESTA plus vaccination rather than
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Good.
Sorry, I got distracted for 2 seconds. I had to hand a laptop to someone.
Was it a small person?
A small person.
But really, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating and raised some extremely interesting points about, you know, how this is all going to process. And it was so interesting what you were saying about the undocumented migrants and how, you know, that program may change under the administration. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. To everybody who's listening, the recording will be online tomorrow. I'll send you the link to that. And as I say, I'd love to talk with you guys about, you know, maybe updating as the vaccination program is rolled out and what's happening sort of come April, May. That would be fantastic. In the meantime, Sophie, thank you so much.
Thanks, Sophie.
I'm just the conduit. Thanks, everybody.
And Elizabeth,
Speak to you
thank
soon.
you so much.
Bye-bye.
Great to see you. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.